Welcome, future doctors, to another episode of the Future Minority Doctor Podcast with Dr. Zulma
and Marina, where we bring you conversations to empower and inspire you to contribute to your community and the world by becoming a doctor.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Future Minority Doctor Podcast. Dr. Zulma and I are going to discuss something called the structured video interview. It's something that not that many students have heard of. We briefly mentioned it in our episode a long time ago about the medical school interview in general, but it's not used that often by schools, and so we haven't emphasized it. But I recently worked with a student who was going to interview at a DO school, and this is the type of interview format that they used, and so we did some practice around it. And in this case, the way that the school she was interviewing at did it was she got 30 seconds to read the prompt that came up on the computer screen, and then 90 seconds to respond to the prompt. And there was no other person on the end of that screen. It was just kind of a computerized system where you press start and you have a certain amount of time for each prompt, and then it just goes on to the next one. So it can be a little nerve-wracking because there's no person that you're talking to. You're just talking into a screen. And if you've ever tried to record reels for Instagram or social media, and you try to keep it to 60 to 90 seconds, you know how quickly 90 seconds can go by. And so you really have to work on making your responses succinct and to the point and getting through everything that you want to get through in those 90 seconds. Now, some schools may do variations on the time. They might do 1 minute to read the prompt and 2 minutes to respond, or they might do 30 seconds to read it and 60 seconds to respond. So you want to know in advance how much time you're going to have to do those prompts so that you can practice. Because if I have one point for you today, it is that practice is key for performing well on the SVI type interviews. Dr. Zulma, if you were doing this, I mean, we didn't have this type of interview back in our day, but what are some of the things that you've seen that students get nervous about if it were this kind of interview?
I think it's just thinking on your feet, right? The only thing that makes it, I think, hard is that I guess it depends on the person, right? For some people, it helps when you have a person there, like it's easier for you to engage. But I guess some people, this actually might work better for them knowing that they don't have to have a person in front of them. And if you're really good at doing social media posts and you're on there all the time, I think you actually might thrive because you're used to just thinking on your feet. But I would say that would probably be the biggest challenge is I don't know what question they're going to ask me. I have to respond quickly, but you have this amount of time to respond in. So I think that's what would probably be difficult.
Definitely. Yeah. And a lot of us get kind of camera shy, and that's normal. Luckily, it's a short amount of time. So there is one benefit of this sort of question is that 90 seconds is only 90 seconds. You don't have to go down rabbit holes. You don't have to go down super high levels of complexity in answering the question, but you do have to learn how to think on your feet, how to decide quickly how you're going to structure your response, and then fit that response into 90 seconds, right? And so with the student who I was practicing with recently, we had an hour of one-on-one practice together, and I used ChatGPT. I said, hey, Chat, pretend that I have an SVI coming up, come up with like a list of potential questions that would be asked. And so we just went through like 10 of those consecutively, and she got better and better and better with each one. So practice is key. You can do that. You can use an AI tool like ChatGPT or any of the other ones out there to come up with a list of potential questions and then just practice. But you have to have a little timer in front of you. So 30 seconds to read it and prepare, and then 90 seconds to respond. And in the real interview, you do have a timer countdown so that you know how much time you have left. But for a lot of students, it can be challenging fitting a full response into 90 seconds, especially when students start to tell stories. I always encourage students, whenever possible, you want to include a story or an experience from your life, whether that's from your volunteering or from circumstance that a family member experienced or that you experienced or work experience, because it always makes it more engaging. If you say, I'm going to answer this question, but I'm also going to relate it to an experience that I had, it's always more memorable and more engaging for the person listening to it if you do that. However, fitting a story into like 45 seconds out of those 90 seconds is challenging. You will have to really decide, what are the main points of the story that I want to say? How am I going to say it quickly enough so that I make my point and I include enough details, but not too many details that I run out of time, right? And so that's the art of the SBI, is really learning how to decide quickly what you want to say and then say it in anywhere from 60 to 120 seconds, typically, depending on the school. So let's talk through some examples. So I have a list of some examples that might come up, and some of these I practiced with my mentee. So it could be something as basic as, why do you want to become a physician? It could also be something centered around communication and empathy, like, you notice that a patient seems anxious before a procedure. How would you approach the situation? Or how would you respond if a patient refused medically necessary treatment due to cultural or personal beliefs, right? It could also be something around professionalism. So you overhear a colleague making an inappropriate joke about a patient. How should you respond, right? So they're not super long, complex questions. They're more to the point questions because, of course, you only have a short period of time to respond. You could also have questions around diversity, inclusion, or social awareness. So tell us about a time when you had to challenge your own assumptions or biases. What does cultural humility mean to you in the context of medicine? And then there are other ones. Leadership, an example for leadership would be, what do you think makes an effective team in healthcare? Or you're leading a volunteer group and a member consistently arrives late. How would you handle it? And then finally, there can be ones around critical thinking, like a patient presents with a condition you've never seen before. How would you approach the situation, right? And also things around growth mindset and personal reflection, like, describe a time you failed at something. How did you recover from it? So that's just kind of a list of examples. So Dr. Z, I'm going to use you as sort of, we're kind of going to bounce ideas off of each other
Yeah.
here to talk about what makes an ideal response to these sorts of questions. So let's talk about that last one, the more personal reflection type question. Describe a time you failed at something. How did you recover from it? How do you think a student could respond in an engaging and interesting way to that kind of question?
I think what would be good is if, I mean, of course, you're thinking on your feet, so it's really hard, but just whatever comes to your mind of a first time where you actually did fail at something and how you responded to it, go ahead and say it, because you don't have a lot of time, right, to think about an
Mhm.
answer. And it could be something as simple as, like, if you recently took an exam, right, and you didn't do as great as you thought you could, maybe you can just say, like, and what it was because of X, Y, and Z. I would suggest, though, whatever that problem is, have a solution and how you're going to get better at it. So within that small amount of time, you want to make sure that you've identified the problem, but then also identified a solution and how you would avoid something like that again in the future. So I think
Mhm.
trying to squeeze that into that short amount of time would be good. I would also say, just, it's hard because you're not talking to anyone. It's so much easier to have more emotion in your face, using your hands to talk if there's somebody there. So I would
Mhm.
say that's going to also be very important as you're responding to this question, with that you pretend there's someone there. So then that way there's a eye contact with the camera, whether you use your hands, whether you're smiling. I think all of that will also be important. Of course, if it's something that you
Mhm.
felt that, you can show those emotions with it, and then how you bounce back up. I think they're going to be looking at both your communication, the issue that the question is asking, but also just your nonverbal communication as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. With this type of question, make sure you address both parts of it, because it's sort of a two-part question. Tell me about a time you failed at something, And then that second part of like, how did you recover from it?
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of addressing the how did you or what did you learn from it
Learn.
type of part. Right. And so I agree. Don't overthink it. It does not have to be a common misconception is that these questions have to be an experience related to medicine. So a student looking at that
Mm-hmm.
question might be like, oh, when was the time I failed with one of my pre-med classes or with a clinical scenario, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be. It could be something like one time I was running a 5K and my goal was to run the 5K in 32 minutes and I didn't make that goal, right? I stayed out late the night before, probably drank more than I should have. I don't know if you want to really bring that in, but maybe
Probably not that one.
stayed out late with my friends the night before
There
and I
you go.
didn't get enough sleep. I know, right? Maybe don't share certain details. But and then I just during the race, I just like I couldn't run as fast as I thought I would. And so it could be something simple like it could also be something like something with a family relationship. Like my
Yeah.
mom had asked me to do this thing and I really thought I would have time to do it. And then I ended up having too much on my plate and I didn't follow through with it. And she was really disappointed in me. I failed at doing the thing that I promised I would do for my family member. Right. So sometimes people get into their heads and they're like, oh, it has to be like a capital F failure. Like I failed, I bombed the MCAT or I failed a class or something like that. It doesn't have to be that kind of failure. It can be any little failure. What they want to see is they want to see some of your maturity and personal development come out of this question, right? And how are you able to think about your experiences, reflect on them, and then determine to do better, right? And that's what really matters. This one is specifically asking you for a story. So you can spend basically most of the time talking about the story and then just kind of wrapping it up at the end. This is how I recovered from it. This is what I learned from it. And this is how I'm going to try to avoid that happening again. Right. But 90
Yeah.
seconds, you got to practice getting it in 90 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes we get caught up, especially with interviews. You're trying to think of this grandiose thing that happened, and you want to talk about that because that makes it'll make you look better. But I think what they're getting at here is they just want to know who you are, like just very
Mhm.
whatever it might be, like failing at something like
Yep.
I was late to something significant, like I was late to getting to class on time, or in my case, I forget a lot of things with my kids. Some of you
Uh-huh.
might have children. Little failure. You can talk about anything because they're trying to see you as a person. Okay. So don't get too
Mhm.
stuck. Like, have to think about the mightiest thing that's ever happened to me as well.
Exactly.
It's better for you to get an
Exactly.
answer than nothing at all and then the time's up.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you alluded, Dr. Z, to the not just verbal communication, but your nonverbal communication. So, a couple of key points about how you should be appearing on camera. So, you want to maintain eye contact. And this is tricky because you're in front of a computer
Mhm.
screen, right? So, try to like center the the part where you're seeing the prompts, like try to position it close to where your camera is on your laptop or on your desktop, right? So it might involve shrinking the window and bringing it up closer to the camera, or it might involve just like moving things around on your screen so that you might not be actually be making direct contact with the little tiny camera on your computer, but you'll be making approximate eye contact, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. So, and since there is no person on the other end, if you want to try just looking at your camera screen, you can, but make sure you have the timer displayed nearby so that you can also be
Mhm.
looking at it without moving your eyes too much as you're as you're recording, right? So that's a little strategy for maintaining eye contact in this type of scenario when there's not a person in front of you. Also, you want to try to speak clearly and at a measured pace. Lots of people start speeding up a lot when they're really nervous, or maybe English is a second language for you and you speak more slowly. Practice is going to help you regardless of which end of that spectrum you're on to speak at a more measured pace for you, right? You don't have to necessarily speak at the same pace that somebody else would, but you have to speak at what's considered like a decent pace for yourself. Also, it's going to be a little hard to kind of have some warmth or smiles in there, but you do want to avoid being too monotone in these sorts of interviews because they want to see who you are as a person through this interview, right? And if you're just monotone responding to the questions really quietly like not making any facial expressions and just being really serious, that your warmth isn't going to come through. Right? So you want to make sure that some of that personal warmth is coming through, whether it's through occasional smiles or some facial expressions, some hand gestures. Some of us are more naturally gifted at using hand gestures and some are not. That's okay. You don't have to force it if it's too unnatural for you. Also, watch your posture. A lot of students have swivel chairs nowadays, and when they're nervous, they start to swivel in their chair like this. And
Yeah.
that is a clear sign of nervousness and anxiety. So if you have to go grab a chair from your kitchen or somewhere else in your apartment or your house and put yourself on a chair that cannot move, that way you don't even have to think about it. It's just not going to happen, right? And then one more thing, avoid overly rehearsed responses. I have some students who over prepare for these, and then I can tell that they're reading off of a script that they wrote for themselves. Don't do that. It comes off as really unnatural, and it actually ends up reflecting poorly on you because they think, oh, they can't think on their feet, right? They
Yeah.
had to use a crutch in order to answer this question. And yeah, they want people who can think on their feet. They want people who can be natural when it comes to clinical interactions and professional interactions. And they want you to be willing to challenge yourself, right? Any
Yeah.
other things to add to that, Dr. Z?
Yes. Look presentable, please. Don't get out of bed with your bed head and
Right.
record yourself.
Yeah, it
And
should be
then,
obvious, but thank you for saying that.
yes, yeah. Yeah, it's just I say that because sometimes I've met with people and I'm like, oh. Right? The other thing though too is your background. If you're gonna have a background, if you have a messy bedroom in the background, you don't want that as your background either
Mhm.
fade it out or find something nice that looks nice too because they are paying attention to it. And more than
Mhm.
anything, just think about if you were the interviewer and you had to sit and watch a bunch of these videos, like which ones are going to be more appealing to you? The monotone kid that's talking like this, or somebody that's like has personality, they're talking about it, they're sharing insights of their personal life. I mean, just think
Mhm.
about it. We all watch TV, we all watch shows. The ones that are usually more appealing, or interviews, or whatever it might be that we see on TV, are the people who tend to come out more like themselves, right? So just think
Uh-huh.
about this because they're watching so many of these videos.
Mhm.
So you want to be remembered. So just be yourself, but
Mhm.
and again, your background does matter. So make sure you're in a place that looks nice. The other thing too I forgot to mention is the lighting, right? I have met with people sometimes as well. Make sure the lighting is right as well. So if you need to get lights around your camera, that's fine. The brightest room in your home as well, that would
Mhm.
be well, and that it's quiet. Okay, so all of
Mhm.
those little things also matter that you want to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah. And nowadays you can buy a ring light for your computer for like $10 on Amazon or at Walmart. They're so easy to get nowadays. Just invest
Mhm.
because the ring light really can make a big difference. If you just have poor lighting, not all of us can control the lighting in our room or in our office or
Mhm.
wherever we are, but we can get a ring light for like $10, $20 that will help make the look much more professional.
And I would also, I know I've done this before for myself too, is just record yourself a couple of times, like
Mhm.
responding, and then watch yourself. That way, you're looking at what your facial expressions are while you're talking. If you have
Mhm.
mannerisms with your hand, or even just by recording, you can see how your background looks, how you look, how your posture is as you're talking as
Mhm.
well. If the leveling of the camera is right too, so that way there's more of that direct contact. So do practice that too as well. And that's something you can do on your own before you practice with somebody.
Absolutely. I echo that 1,000%. That's what I did with the student where we practiced. I recorded the session and then I sent it to her and I said, watch yourself because you're going to learn more as you watch yourself than what I can tell you, right? You're going to notice the little things about your facial expression, about your body movement, about your posture that maybe you weren't aware of while you were speaking. And this can be a really uncomfortable thing to do. Dr. Z and I know because when we started recording this podcast, we started watching ourselves and listening to ourselves, and we started thinking, oh my gosh, like maybe I don't like that or I don't like this. And some of those things are just, they're just part of you, and you're just going to have to get comfortable with them and accept them. But some of the other things, like, oh, I use the word like too much, or I use the word too much. A little bit of that sprinkled throughout your conversation isn't going to be that noticeable, but a lot of it is. Or I take too long to think of an example, or I pause too long, or I speak too fast, right? So watching yourself is really going to increase your self-awareness about those things on camera that you might not have been aware of when you were thinking on your feet and just trying to come up with something to say. So record yourself. You're going to learn a lot. It might be uncomfortable as it has been for us watching ourselves in this podcast, but it's also helped us to become more self-aware and to correct some of those things that we were not aware of at first.
Definitely.
Just finally, to wrap things up, we're going to kind of summarize what are admissions committees looking for through these SVIs and really through any interview, right? They're looking for your ability to think on your feet. They're looking for self-awareness, maturity, teachability. They're looking for an ability to communicate professionally. They're looking that you exhibit compassion and cultural sensitivity. They're also looking for examples of how you handle pressure, and also just getting to know whether your values align with the school's values and mission. They're not looking for perfection. They're really looking more for authenticity and self-reflection, right? So that example we discussed about, tell me about a time that you failed at something and what did you learn from it? That's a perfect example, right? It's a window into you as a person, whether you're mature, whether you've learned from your life experiences and are able to reflect on them and grow and evolve, right? So not perfection, but authenticity and reflection. If you remember those things and don't try to just ask the internet, what is the perfect response to this question? You're going to do much better, because the reality is there is no perfect response to any question. They really want to get to know you more as a person.
Exactly. Yeah, just be yourself, guys. You're right. Don't be perfect. Just be yourself. Be who you really are. That's who they want to see.
Exactly. So, key points, SVI is a thing. If you end up getting one of them, practice, record yourself, use AI tools to come up with examples or look for examples on the internet that you can practice. I would say practice with at least 10 to 15 scenarios on your own in order to get comfortable, especially with the timing, because the last thing you want to happen is for you to be 90 seconds in and then the camera cuts off and you were only halfway through saying what you wanted to say, right? So the recording yourself, watching it, practicing with lots of scenarios is exactly what you need to do to get comfortable with these sorts of questions and to do well on your SVI interview day. That's all we have to say for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you found this helpful. Until next time.
Peace and love, everyone, and good luck.